of workers who were working in rehabilitation with clients who were going through insurance claims where the insurance company was perhaps questioning the client's disability. So if a client writes an email to a social worker saying, oh, I had a wonderful day, I was able to go out, I even was able to do some jogging for the first time, and that email falls into the hands of the insurance company that is challenging that client's claim, the client is very vulnerable. You could see this happening in custody situations. You could see it happening in divorce and separation proceedings, so that the workers, again and again, they kept talking about how uncomfortable they felt about clients' vulnerability and the need for us as social workers to be constantly educating clients about that. Then we interviewed our young and new practitioners, and as Faye said, they are the digital natives. They've grown up with this. And we found that they seamlessly integrated technology into their practice. They also view technology as a reflective tool, and they were able to theoretically link it to practice. They were frustrated by a lack of organizational endorsement and policy directives, or by overly constraining policy. So it's just as Faye said earlier, we still are really struggling with a policy issue. In terms of seamlessly integrating technology, the younger practitioners were very open. They felt that if I have to text somebody at 11 o'clock at night, well, that's what I have to do. Just as if I have to phone somebody who's in crisis on the weekend, well, that's what I have to do. So they weren't making distinctions as we might between phone call and texting and email. They view technology as a reflective tool, and this was very interesting. One worker talked about realizing that she was checking her email at midnight and began to recognize that, well, then maybe I'm overly concerned about this client and this client's situation. So if you think about in the old days when we only had telephones, we likely were not going to be telephoning clients again and again to see if they're okay. But knowing that clients can communicate with us, this social worker was checking again and again to see if the client was okay or if the client was reaching out for help. So it became the stimulus for looking at what she was concerned about in her work and in her relationship with the client. The young practitioners talked a lot about social justice issues. In other words, what about people who don't have access to all the technology because of socioeconomic reasons, because you're working with elder clients who may not have learned how to use the internet or how to use computers. And they also talked about the fact that the internet is not seen as a basic need, and it's not included in the social assistance budget. Again, policy, too much, too little. And then we interviewed the executive directors of a number of agencies across sectors. They also recognized the ascending digital world, and they recognized the complexities of developing policies and procedures. A lot of them said that you have to be standards-based and guidelines-based, and you really want to look at the best practice or the evidence. Well, we've looked at that, and there really is very little in the literature. At the end of the day, clinicians will do what they believe is right for the client and for the practice, not what the organization tells them to do. So we had very enlightened executive directors taking this kind of position. They really did not want to limit innovation. The executive directors we interviewed recognized that the cyber world can be value-added, and they didn't want to start developing policies that were overly constraining. Now, this varies very much from sector to sector, because social workers who are practicing in hospitals are often practicing with very firm organizational policies about what they can and can't do over the internet. The general feeling from the executive directors was educate, which is what we're all trying to do, rather than regulate. As a profession, we don't regulate other areas of clinical practice. So can we realistically keep pace with the changing digital landscape, but not constrain innovation? Final quote, right now I want to encourage exploration, and you can't encourage that with a million don't do this. So back to our conclusions.
And yes, so our conclusions after the second round was that practitioners really are beginning to tailor their own technology-informed practices. And that really the issue is not whether to use it or not to use it, because it's happening, but how to use technology effectively and responsibly. So we have an example. I'm going to go back. First of all, ask the question, how many here have ever used Skype with clients? With clients? Okay, some. How many have used FaceTime? Okay, so actually quite a few social workers do use Skype, and again, we thought this is important. So it's up to us to be aware of policies. So I don't know if people know that according to Skype, in the terms and conditions, you are not allowed to use it to provide professional services. So if something happens and you run into trouble, we're not allowed to do it. And it's interesting, if you look at the terms, they're so long and detailed that nobody sees them. So that includes providing counseling services. So this is just an example of why we have to become aware of how we're going to use that. And then the next one, I think is really important, is the content of communication. They reserve the right to review the content. And the purpose is to enforce the terms so they can block, prevent delivery. And even if they don't, again, it's shifted our privacy. In the past, things happened in our office, and if you taped it, you had the tape. Now, Skype has the tape, and even if they might never do anything with it, somebody they have it there. So when you think about it, I think about sessions I've had, like with kids, where they might talk about horrible fantasies and stuff, but you're not worried about them doing anything. If that's in that Skype session, somebody has that. I looked up the terms for FaceTime. FaceTime doesn't forbid it, so you can do it and charge, but they similarly have the right to review and keep it. So again, just knowing that, and for clients to know too, those are the kinds of examples that we need, and that's why agencies actually need to address policies and guidelines, because we need to be informed, and if we decide to do something, what are the implications and what do we need to let our clients know. So basically, the other conclusion is that older and younger practitioners do adjust differently, and in a way they have to kind of work together, because one group is a digital native, the other group, the rest of us, are immigrants. So client practitioners, what they do now, as opposed to, as Marion said before, they just were caught unawares, but now they discuss the guidelines and expectations right at the beginning of the session, whereas in the past they might not have, and that's important. But the younger ones really respond to clients on their terms. And again, not all of them, but that's what we're finding. So they respond to email at all times because they're more likely to do that. And they examine their own reactions. So again, our conclusion is it's not feasible to adopt and maintain a policy that prohibits it, because it's not going to happen, because clients are going to communicate to us and the practitioners will go underground. And by creeping into practice, cyber technology has really extended the boundaries between social worker and client. And just like it's extended the boundaries in the world, it's extended it in our practice. And that doesn't mean we have no control over it, but we need to understand it is different, and we need to address that somehow. And so the responsible position is to examine and understand the consequences and implications in order to inform practitioner behavior and to inform the client. And again, it might vary from client to client, but basically we have to address that. And there's our email addresses if you want copies. Ruth.
Okay. I can talk loud. Does the email servers have the right to look at emails in the same way as faxes they can now?
Do email servers have the right to look at communications the way Skype does? That's the question.
You know, that's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I imagine they do, because I know with cyberbullying, if you get an email that you're not happy with, you can contact the server and they can do something about it. So they have access to it. So when you delete it, what we do know is when you delete it, it's not deleted, it's there, they can access it.
Thanks, Ruth. Any other questions? John?
Yes, I just wanted to, I think I can talk about
Okay.
here. I work at Family Service Ontario. We oversee the family service agencies and approximately 1,000 social workers who work at them. And we recognize the importance of addressing this issue about 3 years ago. And we have an accreditation program, as some of you may know, which is quite extensive, and there's a large module in the standards on counseling. And about, like I say, 2 or 3 years ago, we introduced a new section of those standards on cyber counseling. So if you didn't know about that, I would encourage you to have a look at it. In fact, I'll send it to you because I think it would be useful for you to give me feedback on whether you think, these could be improved. Similarly, we published a guide